There is a story told in many cultures of the moment the moon reveals its hidden face. For centuries we have seen only the bright side, the side that glows with borrowed light, the side we have been taught to admire. But what happens when the moon turns? When the dark face emerges from behind the veil? When what has been concealed for so long finally steps into view? This is not a story about destruction. It is a story about wholeness. And if you are a Sigma INFJ, this is your story. Because there comes a moment in the life of every Sigma INFJ when the shadow, that vast territory of the self that has been hidden, suppressed and denied, begins to stir. Carl Jung called the shadow the unknown, dark side of the personality, the parts of ourselves we refuse to see, the impulses we bury, the truths we cannot speak. For most people, the shadow remains locked away, a stranger in the basement of the psyche. But for the Sigma INFJ, the one who has spent a lifetime perfecting the art of concealment, who has learned to wear masks so convincing that even they forget what lies beneath, the emergence of the shadow is not a breakdown. It is a revelation. It is the moment when the lone wolf stops pretending to be a sheep. When the wanderer finally admits they were never meant for the village. When the truth you have been hiding from the world and from yourself can no longer be contained. And what happens in that moment changes everything. The Sigma INFJ is rare, not simply because of cognitive functions or personality typology, but because they embody a paradox that most people cannot sustain. They are deeply empathetic yet fiercely independent, profoundly idealistic yet unflinchingly realistic, capable of profound connection yet most alive in solitude. They do not seek the spotlight, yet they command attention when they speak. They do not crave belonging, yet they understand human nature with unsettling clarity. And at the heart of this paradox lies the shadow, the repository of everything they have learned not to show. The parts of themselves that are too intense, too angry, too hungry, too sure, too uncompromising. The Sigma INFJ learns early that their whole self is too much for most people to handle, and so they learn to hide. They become masters of selective revelation, showing only the parts that are palatable, acceptable, safe. They learn to soften their edges, to moderate their truth, to smile when they are seething, to nod when they are certain the other person is wrong. And this works, for a time. It allows them to move through the world without friction, to maintain relationships without conflict, and to be seen as kind, thoughtful, and reasonable. But the shadow grows in the dark. It gathers strength from every suppressed truth, every swallowed rage, every moment of forced compliance. And the Sigma INFJ, who has spent so long controlling their inner world with ruthless discipline, begins to feel something shifting. A pressure building, a voice rising. The shadow is not the enemy. This is the first thing that changes when a Sigma INFJ stops hiding it. For years, perhaps decades, the shadow has been treated as a problem, a flaw, a weakness to be managed. The anger has been reframed as something to overcome, the cynicism as something to transcend, the desire for power as something to deny. But Jung was clear about this. The shadow is not evil. It is simply unconscious. It is the parts of the self that have been banished, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient, because they threaten the persona, because they do not fit the image we wish to project. And when the Sigma INFJ finally turns to face the shadow, when they stop running from it and instead ask what it wants, what it knows, what it has been trying to say, they discover something extraordinary. The shadow is not a monster. It is a teacher. It holds the keys to the parts of themselves they have been missing. The anger in the shadow is not destructive rage. It is righteous fury at injustice, at betrayal, at systems that crush the individual in the name of collective comfort. The cynicism is not bitterness. It is the hard-won wisdom of someone who has seen through the illusions most people cling to, who understands that idealism without realism is naivety. The hunger for power is not tyranny, it is the drive for autonomy, for the ability to shape one's own life without interference, to refuse submission to unworthy authority. And when these truths are brought into the light, when the Sigma INFJ stops apologizing for them, something shifts in the foundations of their being. The first thing people notice when a Sigma INFJ stops hiding their shadow is the change in their presence. There is a stillness that was not there before, or rather, a stillness that was always there but now carries weight. Before, the Sigma INFJ moved through the world like a careful observer, present but apart, engaged but guarded. They asked questions, listened intently, and offered insights that seemed to come from nowhere. But there was always a softness to their delivery, a gentleness designed to make their observations easier to swallow. When the shadow emerges, that softness does not disappear, but it is no longer the default. The Sigma INFJ who has integrated their shadow speaks with a clarity that can be unsettling. They do not hedge, soften, or wrap uncomfortable truths in comforting language. When they see manipulation, they name it. When they witness self-deception, they point to it. When they recognize a pattern of behavior that will lead to suffering, they say so, without the need to be liked for saying it. This is not cruelty, it is precision. And it comes from a place of having stopped pretending that politeness is the same as kindness, that avoiding discomfort is the same as creating safety. The shadow teaches the Sigma INFJ that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it stings, even when it makes people uncomfortable, even when it costs you their approval. Nietzsche wrote that one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star, and the Sigma INFJ who has embraced their shadow understands this viscerally. The chaos is not disorder, it is the wild, untamed part of the self that refuses to be domesticated by social convention, that insists on authenticity, even when authenticity is inconvenient. And from that chaos comes something luminous. A kind of presence that cannot be faked, a kind of power that does not need to announce itself, a kind of truth that resonates at a frequency most people have forgotten how to hear. People respond to this in one of two ways. Some are drawn to it, magnetically, instinctively. They recognize something in the Sigma INFJ that they have lost in themselves, some spark of uncompromising authenticity that they buried long ago. They feel seen by this person, not because the Sigma INFJ flatters them or makes them comfortable, but because the Sigma INFJ sees through their defenses and recognizes the truth beneath. These people become the rare few that the Sigma INFJ allows into their inner circle, not because they are perfect, but because they are real. They have their own shadows, their own struggles, their own battles with authenticity, and they do not need the Sigma INFJ to be anything other than what they are. This is the kind of connection the Sigma INFJ has always craved but rarely found, the kind that does not require performance or pretense, that can hold complexity and contradiction without collapsing into judgment. But others recoil. They feel threatened by the Sigma INFJ's refusal to play the games they are used to playing, by the directness that cuts through their carefully constructed narratives, by the presence that demands reciprocal authenticity. These people accuse the Sigma INFJ of being harsh, cold, arrogant, and difficult. They weaponize the language of emotional safety to demand that the Sigma INFJ return to the role of the accommodating empath, the gentle guide, the one who absorbs their dysfunction without complaint. And this is where the shadow reveals its greatest gift, because the Sigma INFJ, who has integrated their shadow, no longer needs everyone to like them. They no longer derive their sense of worth from being seen as kind, thoughtful, and understanding. They have discovered a deeper source of validation, one that comes from aligning with their own truth, from integrity, rather than approval. And so they let these people go, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They recognize that not everyone is meant to walk with them, that some relationships were only ever sustained by their willingness to diminish themselves, and that the price of maintaining those connections is too high. The mythology of the descent is ancient and universal. Inanna descends into the underworld, stripped of her garments and her power at each gate, until she hangs on a hook, naked and dead, only to be resurrected with new wisdom. Persephone is taken into the darkness, becomes queen of the underworld, and returns to the surface transformed, no longer the innocent maiden, but the sovereign, who has seen what lies beneath. Orpheus journeys into the land of the dead, to retrieve what he has lost, and though he fails in his immediate task, he returns with knowledge of the boundary between worlds. These stories are not about punishment or tragedy. They are about initiation. They are about the necessity of descending into the hidden, the repressed, the feared, in order to become whole. And this is what happens when a Sigma INFJ stops hiding their shadow. They descend. Not into madness, not into destruction, but into the underworld of their own psyche, into the territory they have avoided, the self they have denied, the truth they have been too afraid to face. And what they find there is not darkness alone, but power, the power of saying no without guilt, of setting boundaries without apology, of walking away from what does not serve them without looking back. The power of their own anger, which is not the petty irritation of the ego, but the fierce protectiveness of the soul that refuses to be violated. The power of their autonomy, the bone-deep certainty that they do not need anyone's permission to be who they are, to live as they choose, to follow the path that calls to them even when it leads away from the crowd. This is not the power of domination. The Sigma INFJ has no interest in controlling others. This is the power of sovereignty, of self-possession, of having claimed the throne of one's own inner kingdom, and recognizing that no external authority has the right to govern there. Jung spoke of individuation, the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible unity or whole. This is the journey of the Sigma INFJ, who has stopped hiding their shadow. They are no longer fragments, no longer the persona they show the world and the hidden self they keep locked away. They are integrated, whole, and in that wholeness, they discover a freedom they did not know was possible. They stop performing the role of the empath who is always available, always understanding, always willing to absorb the emotional chaos of others. They recognize that empathy without boundaries is not compassion, it is self-destruction. They learn to say, "This is not mine to carry," to walk away from drama that does not belong to them, and to refuse the role of therapist, savior, or emotional dumping ground. And they do this without guilt, because the shadow has taught them that self-preservation is not selfishness, that protecting their energy is not cruelty, that they cannot pour from an empty cup and should not be expected to try. They stop pretending that they want what other people want. The conventional markers of success, the social rituals that are supposed to bring fulfillment, the relationships that are supposed to make them feel complete, these things have never resonated, and the Sigma INFJ who has embraced their shadow finally admits this. They stop forcing themselves to want the suburban house, the conventional career, the wide circle of shallow friendships. They stop apologizing for preferring solitude to socialization, depth to breadth, meaning to comfort. They build a life that reflects their actual values, not the values they were told they should have. And they do this with ruthless clarity. They stop waiting for permission to be brilliant. The Sigma INFJ has always had insights that others could not see, ideas that challenged the status quo, creative visions that seemed too wild, too strange, too ambitious. But they have learned to moderate these, to present them in ways that would not threaten, to downplay their own understanding so that others would not feel diminished. The shadow says enough. It says stop pretending you do not see what you see, stop hiding your intelligence, Stop making yourself smaller so that others can feel bigger. And when the Sigma INFJ listens to this voice, when they stop hiding the full extent of their perception, they become a force. Not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. Their work becomes sharper, their ideas more fully realized, their presence more magnetic. They stop seeking validation from those who will never understand them, and start seeking collaboration with those who can match their intensity, their vision, their refusal to settle for mediocrity. The transformation is not without cost. There are relationships that do not survive the emergence of the shadow. People who cannot accept this more complete version of the Sigma INFJ, who preferred the accommodating version, the one who absorbed their dysfunction without complaint. There are moments of profound loneliness, when the Sigma INFJ realizes just how few people can meet them in the territory they now inhabit, how rare it is to find someone who can hold space for both the light and the dark, the empathy and the anger, the idealism and the cynicism. But there is also a profound relief, a sense of coming home to oneself after years of exile, a recognition that the loneliness of hiding is far worse than the loneliness of being seen, because at least when you are seen you are real. The lone wolf walks at the edge of the forest, neither fully part of the pack nor entirely separate. This is the Sigma INFJ who has stopped hiding their shadow. They are no longer trying to fit in, no longer performing the rituals of belonging that never quite worked. But they are not alone in the way that isolation is alone. They have found their people, the rare few who can walk beside them without needing them to be anything other than what they are, and they have found themselves, which in the end is the only companionship that truly matters. The shadow, once revealed, does not retreat. It becomes part of the daily existence of the Sigma INFJ, not as a dark secret, but as an integrated aspect of the self. There are still moments when they choose to soften, to accommodate, to bend, but these are conscious choices, not compulsions. They know when they are choosing diplomacy and when they are choosing truth, and they no longer confuse the two. They have learned to wield their shadow as a tool, not a weapon. They can access their anger when it is needed to protect themselves or others, their cynicism when it is needed to see through deception, and their hunger for power when it is needed to claim their autonomy. But they are not consumed by these things, because they are no longer afraid of them. The greatest gift of the shadow is this. It reveals that you are more than you believed you were. More complex, more powerful, more whole. The Sigma INFJ who stops hiding their shadow does not become a different person. They become more completely themselves, and in doing so, they offer the world something it desperately needs. A model of integration, of wholeness, of what it looks like to be fully human, light and dark together, without apology.